Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of The Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, there will be talk about Real Salt Lake stumbling out of the post-World Cup break. I'll talk about a Mammoth extension, and yes, both ways you look at that word, whether it's the team or the animal/adjective, that is correct in what happened there, and I'll dive into what it means outside of just what it means to the roster. And then the Jazz offseason has been getting grades from everywhere, so I'll dissect what a lot of people are saying and what it actually means when we look at the season ahead. But thank you all so much for being here. As always, please don't forget to rate and review this podcast 5 stars wherever it is, however you listen. Helps me out. Well, it helps me up too, but it helps me out a ton. And don't forget to share this with one person that you think might enjoy the program. Don't forget to follow me on the socials. That is the Matt Cave Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can also find me on YouTube. That would be the Matt Cave Podcast, all one word. And if you want to contact me, that is the mattcavepod@gmail.com. All right, so let's dive into it, and let's start with Real Salt Lake. So the first 2 matches haven't really gone to plan. Against LAFC, they allowed an own goal. They just did not press up at the edge of their own box, which allowed Son Heung-min, who is a world-caliber talent, to score a relatively easy goal by his standards. And then they gave up an additional goal there in the game, and they only scored 1. So they lose the initial game out in LA 3-1, and then they played a game against Portland up in Portland. And in the farewell game for a Portland Timbers, I don't want to say stalwart, but a guy who's been around for a while, Felipe Mora, his final game with Portland sees him score 2 against Real Salt Lake in a game where Real Salt Lake loses 2-1. Real Salt Lake also had a red card in this match. They scored first. Juan Manuel Sanabria, the lone representative of Real Salt Lake at this World Cup, scored a goal in the 18th minute, but with Morgan Gilavogi going out with a red card in the 34th minute, the writing was always on the wall. Real Salt Lake was always going to lose this one at that point, which is a real big bummer because before that point, Portland Timbers, they had 18 points on the season, only 5 wins, and now they're up to 21 points. They are within shooting distance of Real Salt Lake in the standings, where Real Salt Lake hasn't moved, and they are currently not looking too great, all things considered. So they are sitting in 4th behind LAFC. The only good news being behind LAFC by 4 points is that Los Angeles has already played 17 matches, whereas Real Salt Lake's only played 15. So they got 2 games in hand, which means they could have 32 points to Los Angeles' 30 at this point. So that would put Real Salt Lake tied top of the table with Vancouver. Vancouver has played the same amount of games as Real Salt Lake, so there is that to keep in mind. And then San Jose is the only other team ahead of Real Salt Lake currently, and they currently sit with 32 points, but they've played 16 as opposed to Real Salt Lake's 15. What does this all mean? Well, in the game against Los Angeles, they had the lion's share of the possession. They had something like 71% of the possession. But it doesn't matter how much of the ball you have, it matters what you do with it. And Real Salt Lake just couldn't get it into the net. So that is something that is a little bit worrying. Xavier Gozo has been held goalless in these first 2 matches, as well as Diego Luna. They both have been held without a goal against Los Angeles and Portland, and you can kind of see it stifling the team a little bit. When you look at just like the starting lineups for both teams, or for Real Salt Lake, not seeing Justin Glad out there is a little worrying. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury. I don't know what's going on there, but he has been like the leader of the back line for years and years. And you're kind of seeing, I don't know, DeAndre Yedlin showing his age a lot. And Angel is subbed out early in both of these games too. So just looking at, well, not both of them, but in the game against Portland, he was subbed out, but that's a weird one, so you can't really look too much into that because Real Salt Lake was down to 10 men. But hopefully this is just a blip in the radar, like with what the Utah Royals went through with their first couple of games, and now Real Salt Lake can get back on track. Looking ahead for Real Salt Lake, they have their next game against St. Louis City SC, which could be a get-right game. St. Louis is at 22 points, so not terribly too far behind Real Salt Lake, but not really a team you fear that much, all things considered. In their previous match, Real Salt Lake did draw with St. Louis 2-2, with Victor Olatunji getting both goals for Real Salt Lake. This one was played in St. Louis, so the game coming up here is in Sandy, and Real Salt Lake has been played very well at home this year. So it could be a bounce-back, get-right game for the Claret and Cobalt. I hope it is, because that magical first half of the season, I don't want it to collapse out from under them. And if it does collapse out from under them, does Real Salt Lake feel like they can pull the trigger on selling a couple of these guys? Maybe selling a Guy Lavogui and a Diego Luna to get that monster bag of cash that could come back their way, upwards of like $11 million between the two of them, to then reinvest into the squad. Maybe. If the second half of the season keeps going the way it's going, I could definitely see Real Salt Lake going, all right, let's get rid of a couple of these guys that European clubs are interested in, get that money, and then reinvest it into the club and see what we can do. I hope that doesn't come to it, but I definitely see a reality in front of us where that happens. Real Salt Lake loses 4 or 5 in a row. They fall out of the playoff picture, and management and ownership go, all right, let's get these guys out the door while there's still interest in them. I don't want that to happen, but it could. So I'll keep my eyes peeled for anything that happens there. But right now, it's not looking great for the Claret and Cobalt. But maybe here on August 1st, the guys can get right against St. Louis. All right, so let's move on to the Utah Mammoth, re-signing John Marino to an 8-year, $54 million extension. That's a big deal, and it's a big deal. So I'll start with the big deal part. 8 years. So starting next offseason, players can no longer sign for 8 years. The max term contract the players can sign in next offseason is 7. So they got John Marino in, they got Nick Schmaltz, Dylan Gunther, Logan Cooley, all those guys, 2 long-term deals that they wouldn't be able to do next offseason. So it's a tidy bit of business by Bill Armstrong, Ryan Smith, Chris Armstrong, all of them when it comes to that sort of thing. John Marino is a solid second-pairing defenseman, and with the salary cap going up this offseason, next offseason, and the offseason after, the number, like the dollar number, isn't going to be as eye-popping as it would have been, say, 3-4 years ago, where it would have eaten up a substantial chunk of the cap for a second-pairing defenseman. But this time, with that salary cap going up, it's not that bad of a deal. I mean, this offseason, we were seeing guys get monster contracts for being a third-line forward or, bottom-pairing defenseman. So, honestly, it's a solid deal for John Marino. He definitely earned it last year. He had a career year last year, as did a lot of players on the team. Lasse Krause had a career year. Dylan Gunther had a career year, Nick Schmaltz. So a lot of guys had career years. Hopefully they can build on them, and that's not their high water mark. And so John Marino gets rewarded just like Nick Schmaltz did, and the team is looking really good going into next year. Right now, the over-under, I track that just because sometimes Vegas knows something that the general public doesn't. Have the Utah Mammoth over-under at 96 points. 96 points is a playoff spot. It is. I would take the over on that if health is steady for the club, and if Sebastian Cossa is that backup goaltender that we need for Karel Vejmelka, that the Mammoth need for Karel Vejmelka. I could see the over being a real possibility for this team. And when you look at the team, there's not many holes. The big hole right now for me is that bottom pairing defense. Dmitry Simashev, and is it going to be Andrew Peak? Is it going to be Maverick Lamoureux? Is it going to be Nick DeSimone? That bottom pairing worries me a little bit because we lose Ian Cole off of that pairing, Sean Dursey off of that pairing, and you put in basically a rookie and a fringe NHLer. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Bill Armstrong go out and get another defenseman, whether it's off of, training camp cuts or a preseason trade or something of the like. I maybe something a little bit better for that bottom pairing defenseman to go along with Dmitry Simashev, because he's basically made the roster at this point. If you look at the moves and you look at the roster move coming into next season, Dmitry Simashev is basically in there. So the defensive pairings, the top two are already set in stone. Like you can set your clock by these guys. Top pairing, Sergachev, Weegar, easy, done. Second pairing, Marino and Schmidt. I mean, with their plus minus last year, you don't really want to mess that pairing up. And then that third pairing is where things get a little bit more antsy. It's Simashev and. Is it going to be Peak? Is it going to be DeSimone? Is it going to be Lamoureux, Duda, or outside of the organization? That's what I'm looking for as one of the major holes on the team. And then on the front line with the forwards, what are we going to do with all of these centers? The only one that could have been moved can no longer be moved. So Hayton's here. Love him or hate him, he's here for the entire season. So he's on the team. Kevin Stenlund is your fourth line center. He is. He's your fourth line center, and he's going to be your specialist center when you need to have a face-off. It's going to be Stenner. Logan Cooley is already in on the second line. Call it the second line, call it the first line. It's the Cooley-Gunther line. And then the top line is really where it gets interesting for me, because they went out and they got Vincent Trocheck to be more physical, to have more net presence, to get the greasy goals. What did the top line lack last year when Nick Schmaltz was center? Getting greasy goals. It was a very fun forward triplet with Krause, Schmaltz, and Keller, but those greasy goals weren't there. And that really affected them down the stretch and in the playoffs. Vincent Trocheck fixes that. And so you throw him on that line, which means Schmaltz bumps out to wing, which is where I would rather him be. And so that bumps Krause down, I would think, onto that second lineup with Cooley and Gunther. And so that third line is going to be Hayton, Anders Lee, and then who? Is it going to be Carcone? Is it going to be Yamamoto? And if it is one of those two, what's going to happen on that fourth line? Because it's going to be Stenlund. It's probably going to be Tanev. Is that going to be the other of Carcone and Yamamoto? Where's TJ Ginla? Personally, I think TJ Ginla goes into that third line instead of Carcone or Yamamoto. And then in that fourth line, you get Tanev, Stenlund, and who? Is it going to be a rotating door of Carcone, Yamamoto? Or is it going to be something else entirely that we don't know? But I don't think Carcone and Yamamoto both make the roster out of preseason. And if they do, one of them's going to be a healthy scratch, and it's going to be a rotating door between those two guys, which is really unfair to both of them, because they both earned the right from their play last season and in the playoffs to be a regular. And with this roster, there's just not a spot for both of them. And then what happens with Liam O'Brien? I think you keep Liam O'Brien for the final year of his contract for what he does in the locker room and what he does off the ice for the guys. And then every so often you can throw him into the roster during a very long 84-game regular season. But what happens with that Carcone-Yamamoto pairing? One of them's got to go, I think, because TJ Ginla's ready. And so outside of that, I don't see what else happens. That signing of Barrett Hayton. And then what happens with Jack McBain? Right? Jack McBain is probably going to be on that fourth line. So does that muscle out Brandon Tanev? Or does it muscle out the Carcone Yamamoto? Jack McBain's being paid too much money to be a healthy scratch. So that signing of Barrett Hayton, that is why I hate it. That's why I hate it. Because you're blocking too much. You're blocking too much talent for a guy who has shown repeatedly he's just not good enough for this team. He doesn't fit this team. And that second round draft pick would be gold come trade deadline season. I just massively disagree with the decision of re-signing Barrett Hayton. Because you let him go, you get that second-round pick, but more importantly, you open up more combinations for your team to be able to be more lethal on the offensive side. And then on the defensive side, you're not going to have to worry about Barrett Hayton taking a stupid penalty. Because you're going to have guys like Jack McBain out there, Michael Carcone, Kyler Yamamoto. Those guys, those are bottom six guys that you can trust. I can't trust Barrett Hayton to do anything. So that's why I hate that signing. I'll probably talk about it more and more and more and more as the season goes along. Unless Barrett Hayton forces me to eat crow, he has a 50-point season. I just don't see it happening. And there's just other guys on the roster that fit better with what Andre Turgeon wants to do, and they fit better with each other. Because one last thing about Barrett Hayton, then I'll move on, is you saw the power play massively improve when Barrett Hayton went out with injury. Both the top unit and the second unit were way more lethal, and I'm not talking about the playoffs. I'm talking about that run-in at the end of the regular season. They were way more lethal without Barrett Hayton just standing there in the middle doing nothing. So, oy vey. There's a lot of talent, a lot of things. That's why these guys get paid a lot of money to do what they do, to figure out who gets on the ice and who is scratched. But with Barrett Hayton being, I'm going to say it, concrete shoes on this team, it could be what sinks them from getting a top 3 Central Division spot and a wild card spot. But that signing for John Marino, the other Mammoth big deal part of it is that it's a long-term deal for this team. The Arizona Coyotes never got guys to sign these kinds of contracts. They just didn't. They would trade for guys that had long contracts so that they would remain with the team for a while. Or what Arizona would do is they would take on massive contracts, buy them out, and attached in that trade would have been like a first-round pick, like what they did with Vancouver. That's how they got Dylan Guenther. So that's how it used to be. Now, getting young guys who are delaying free agency by a long time. Both Dylan Guenther and Logan Cooley have delayed it until the 2030s. And then you got guys like Nick Schmaltz who forewent his shot at a massive payday. He still got paid, but he could have gotten a massive payday with how this free agent market worked out. He just said, nah, I'm going to stay in Utah. That's a big deal. And then you got Mackenzie Weegar waiving his no-trade clause. Vincent Trocheck, not necessarily waiving his no-trade clause for Utah. His no-trade team list shrunk from 16 to 10 on July 1. So he couldn't keep Utah on there to stay away from the dumpster fires in the NHL. So that's kind of what happened there. So we'll see how it works out. Odds are he's going to fall in love with the market and the fans and the team. Odds are that's going to happen. But then you got Anders Lee, who was an unrestricted free agent and chose to come to Utah, over staying with the New York Islanders, the only team he's known, or potentially getting more money and more ice time on a worse team. He chose Utah. So John Marino getting that long-term deal, I mean, there's something here that the players love, and players talk, families talk, agents talk. And obviously, Ryan Smith and Bill Armstrong and Chris Armstrong don't really play hardball like you see out of Anaheim, like you see out of Philadelphia, or some of these other teams, Detroit. So, my goodness, things are going well when it comes to player recruitment and player retention, and John Marino is just another example of it. So, more talk of the Utah Mammoth, obviously, as we get closer and closer to the season, but that's where we're at right now. Now let's talk about the Utah Jazz, a team and an organization that I have avoided talking about for basically the better part of 2 years, just because there's not much to talk about. The past 2 years, they have actively tried to lose. I didn't want to support that. I didn't want to talk about it. If you look at their last 5 seasons, the highest winning percentage they had was in 2022-2023, which was the very first season of the teardown, tank, whatever you want to call it. And they had a .451 win percentage, going 37-45, narrowly missing out on the play-in. Since then, they've gotten worse. 31-51 in 23-24. In 2024-2025, 17-65. That's at .207 win percentage. Yeah. And then last year, when they got fined $500,000 schmeckeldoos for tanking, they went 22-60 with a .268 win percentage. You can see why I didn't want to talk about them. They didn't want to win. They didn't try to win. It was terrible. And yet, somehow, the Delta Center still sold out. Yikes. Why am I talking about them now? Well, things have changed. If we look at NBA championship odds, Utah last season was something like 1,200 to 1 coming into the year. Now they're all the way up to 200 to 1. Being a conference champion, 100 to 1. And winning the division, which they're not going to do because you got teams like, I don't know, Oklahoma City, Denver, Minnesota in front of them. Yeah, I don't really see them falling far enough for Utah to rise up above them this coming season. In the future, I can see it in a couple of years. Absolutely. But as it stands right now, those odds are almost infinitely better than anything we've seen over the last 5 years. So that's one reason I'm talking about them. Power rankings as well. Utah has been 30, 29, maybe 28 over the last 5 years. Now, they're 17th, almost top half of the league. And I would say they're better than 3-4 teams in front of them. They're not better than the Miami Heat, so they're not top 12. But I would argue they're better than Toronto, whether they get Kawhi Leonard or not. I think Utah's better than Toronto. I think they're better than Atlanta. Better than Indiana, even with Tyrese Halliburton coming back. And then I know they're better than Orlando. So, looking at whoever's in front of them, I think they're better than those teams. And then if you look at Western Conference teams in front of them, you got LA, which I disagree with. LA is a Luka Doncic injury away from being a lottery team. Because if you look at their notable additions, Walker Kessler, where they mortgaged their future, 4 first-round picks, basically unprotected. Colin Sexton, which Jazz fans, we love Colin Sexton, but he's not a franchise-altering player. Sandro Mamukelashvili, I mean, he's fun if you want to play like Scrabble. And then Quentin Grimes, which doesn't move the needle at all. They lost DeAndre Ayton. They lost LeBron James. They lost Luke Kennard and Marcus Smart. So LA lost a ton. A ton. And Walker Kessler is not a guy who's going to carry your team if your star goes down. He's just not. They got Houston. Yes, Houston belongs in front of Utah. Kevin Durant. They also have Fred VanVleet, Alperen Sengun. They've got the guys. They do. They only lost Dorian Finney-Smith, so Houston is better. Minnesota, better. They added LaMelo Ball, oddly, but they still have Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, those guys. They still have them. And they also removed Mike Conley. I love Mike Conley, but he's way too old now. And so looking at Minnesota, they are better. And then the other teams in the West that I haven't named, Denver, better. San Antonio, better. Oklahoma City, better. So you look at that, Utah comes in, what, 6th? And that's outside of the play-in. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then one other thing I want to mention is people are looking way too far into Summer League. Holy Moses. It's Summer League. The coaches aren't coaching that hard. The star players aren't really playing that hard. And so, like, all of these grades I'm seeing, and maybe like, oh, Utah's regretting drafting Darren Peterson after that performance in Summer League. Hey, shut up. Like, seriously, it's Summer League. And oh, by the way, Darren Peterson is not expected to play point guard in his rookie year. There's a guy called Keontae George who was pretty good last year and is going to be out to prove that last year was not a blip on the radar. So he's not going to be asked to play point guard. And if he is, it's going to be second unit, and he doesn't even need to play it there either because of Isaiah Collier. You know, the guy who broke John Stockton's rookie assist record. So Darren Peterson is not going to be expected to play point guard, so I don't know. Well, I do know why ESPN brings it up is because they hate Utah. and they don't know what they're talking about anymore because it's ESPN. If you just look at their most recent round of layoffs, Karl Ravitch, 33 years at ESPN, and he gets laid off. He didn't even get the option to retire. He didn't even get the option to run out his current contract. They just laid him off. Why? Because you got to feed the beasts of Stephen A. Loudmouth and Pat Crapafy. So, ESPN's a joke. They are. They're just a joke. They're plain and simple. So, looking at the Jazz, I mean, things don't even need to break correctly for them to make the play-in. I could say you could pen them into making at least the play-in this season because the restraints are off of Will Hardy. He's been told in no uncertain terms to go for it. And with the roster they have, and with the talent that's there, and the drive that a few of these guys have to prove that they're not losers, like that's a key piece of this roster. They want to prove that they're not losers, that they were held back, and that they are here, they want to make a statement, and Darren Peterson has an extra chip on his shoulder because of what's being said about him from the Summer League, but also about being drafted number 2. So this team is going to be out for blood from game 1. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win 70 games. I'm not saying they're going to win 50. But they are going to be making the playoffs, and they are going to be a much more difficult team to play against in the regular season. And that's something that needs to be said. And with LeBron James scarpering off to the East Coast again, the West got that much easier, especially for those playoff spots below the 5 seed. So 5 and 6, I mean, I think it's going to be Phoenix and Utah fighting for those 2 spots. So there you have it. I mean, my tune has changed on Utah because they have stopped trying to tank. They traded their first-round pick next season to Memphis for Jaren Jackson Jr. So there's no reason for them to try to lose anymore. So they've hit that green light. It's pedal to the floor. I'm kind of excited to see what Will Hardy can do with this team. Whether it's worth rooting for, I'll leave that up to you guys. I'm not really... well, I used to be. I'm trying really hard to not be a person that roots for that team, right? I just want to cover them and try to be as detached from them as I can. I fail a lot, but that's what I try to do. So there you have it. But thank you all so much for being here this week. That's what I have for you. Please don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Share it with one person. And I will see you next week when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.